Welcome to DevSecOps, the good, the bad, the ugly. My name is Zach Canord, and I'm your host. This videocast series is about all things DevOps related, but we do add an emphasis on making sure security is a part of that practice. Today, I'll be interviewing Matt, who is leading the software development team at HealthStream. Matt, can you please introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hey, Zach, my name is Matt Wilson. I am VP of Software Engineering at HealthStream in Nashville, Tennessee.
Awesome. So Matt, you're on the application development side. I interviewed Jeff Lockwood in the past, who's your counterpart on the security team, right?
That's right. Exactly right. My partner in crime.
That's awesome. So can you talk about what is DevOps to you?
Certainly. DevOps, I've spent a little time looking at this and my history a little bit to give you some background. In 2013, I moved from a senior developer into a role that we created at HealthStream called configuration manager, and then started a configuration management department. The whole reason that I moved into that role was on my last project, my last development project, I wrote a batch script. So other teams were saying, oh, it takes me 2 weeks to get my code, into our test environment because everything was manual. And so looking at that, I just, like I said, I wrote a simple batch file that just kind of copied all the files after a build and started everything up. And we were up and running after a new code version in an hour or less.
Right.
And so what I did was in that move to configuration management, I wanted to bring consistency and efficiency to all the development teams to really save them all time in their process, because they need to be focusing on delivering value,
Right.
not on the mechanics of getting code to the test environments and ultimately to production. So that consistency of being able to take an environment, take it to a known starting point so that QA doesn't have to involve SMEs to figure out the data configuration in one environment or the other. That was a lot of the things I focused on. And ultimately, I was just trying to reduce the friction in getting software from development to production. So around that time, I read a quote. I was starting to realize, everything that you think about for DevOps now, I was starting to realize how important that was to really gaining efficiency in your teams. And I read a blog post from Adrian Cockcroft, and he was the principal architect at Netflix at the time. And to paraphrase what he said in that blog post, if you're a large company with a well-established culture, it is pretty much impossible to move towards a DevOps mentality. And that was a very disheartening post. I understood what he was trying to convey in that post, and I chose to hear it as, it's going to be difficult, but not impossible. And he's right, though. If you have a lot of minds that are all kind of thinking the same way, and for us, that was we have a very successful platform, but it's monolithic in its design. It was built, in the mid 2000s, and it's scaled very well. But it's time to, change that architecture, and we are doing that.
Right.
But we had 10 years of thinking around that monolithic architecture. And it's very difficult with that much success under your belt to start changing the way your groups develop, the processes they execute, and the way they can deliver value. As you can imagine, all those heartaches you might encounter with a monolithic application, all pretty much centered around how agile you can be from a business perspective, how long it takes to implement change. We were starting to experience those.
Right.
And so the culture change of getting people that have rallied around the monolith and supporting it to a culture of self-empowerment or self-service, that's difficult. And so couple that with the typical things you might hear whenever people talk about DevOps and automation. A lot of people will jump to automation with DevOps. Of course, that's a big part of it. Am I going to lose my job? I don't know how to do that stuff. There's a fear factor in that culture change. So that's some of the resistance. So it's very important to, I'll use the phrase crawl, walk, run a lot, of course, and it's really about change in digestible chunks. You really have to make sure that you implement change in ways that people can digest it, because if they're not accepting it and embracing that change, they're going to resist it. And a move to something as big as a DevSecOps culture is very, very difficult if you have that resistance. And I really think that that's what Adrian was getting at in his blog post.
Yeah, no, that's great. What is your thoughts on the terminology DevSecOps, right? As a a leader in software development, right? The first word was DevOps, but what's your thoughts on DevSecOps?
Yeah, I've pondered that. I actually came up with my own definition some years ago, and words such as collaboration, empowerment, continuous improvement, they all kind of played into that definition. But at the end of the day, I've condensed my definition of DevOps and even DevSecOps into two words: fail fast.
Hmm.
That's really what it's about.
Yeah.
The further up the development pipeline some issue makes it, be it a defect or be it a security issue,
Right.
then you're escalating the cost
Mm-hmm.
of remediating that issue, and you're escalating the risk of that issue. It's one thing for a developer to look over at his buddy next to him and say, hey, look what I almost let go through, but I caught it,
Right. Right.
versus, oh my goodness, this is now in production and it's a defect that could jeopardize customer perception, customer data.
Yep.
That's pretty risky to let it go that far, and it costs a lot,
Yeah.
not just in terms of man hours, but also even to turn customer perception after something gets that far. That's too much risk, and that's why I've condensed that definition down to fail fast, because at the end of the day, that's really what's important. If we're going to try to deliver value as quickly as possible, then you need to reduce the cost of delivering software and increase the efficiency of the teams. And a DevSecOps mentality or culture is the best way to do that, because you're failing fast. You're reducing the risk of those and the cost of those things, making it upstream.
Yeah. So as a development leader, what role do you see development or developers with security?
Great question. One of the things that you want to avoid is a siloed organization or a siloed department. When you have silos in your department, you have groups of people with differing priorities, and that is going to do nothing but introduce virtual walls.
Yeah.
And those virtual walls inhibit collaboration. Those virtual walls could be caused by differing priorities or just the segregation of different groups, introducing, just a natural separation. You want to empower the teams. And that's what I love about Jeff and the way he's approached this as being consultative to the dev teams.
Yeah.
Because to really empower the teams, it's not about telling them what to do. It's about giving them tools to discover what to do on their own and to learn. And so with that group, with a security group consulting, they're now teaching the development teams, look out for this. This is something new coming, or this is what we're seeing a lot of this. Our tools are revealing a lot of this. So you need to look out for it.
Right.
And here's some ways to correct it. But the teams ultimately need to be able to do that on their own, because you cannot scale a development organization if you have silos in place.
Yep. Completely agree. So another thought here, Matt, what type of metrics or KPIs trying to make sure that you're looking at when ensuring that you're actually on the right track?
Absolutely. So as a development leader, of course, I can't tell anyone that we're improving without measuring it, right? So from a Scrum perspective, you want to measure like lead and cycle time to make sure that you're getting stuff out quickly, and that you're measuring the impediments that are getting in the way, or at least identifying them. From a software development perspective, of course, you want to look at like defect leakage. That's very important, because you want to release quality software.
Yep.
If you have high leakage, then you need to start looking at that pipeline and see why, what's letting those defects through. I kind of look at the security aspects as just another type of defect, right? And so catching those as early as possible in the process is absolutely important for what we talked about a moment ago. And that's really where you need to look at your pipeline. You need to look at the processes and the tooling you have in place to identify those security issues as early as possible. And so having that security aspect of DevSecOps, it just plays right into that whole culture change of failing fast.
Yeah, no, that's great, Matt. Well, I appreciate so much for taking the time to come on here and chat with me.
I'm happy to do so. I enjoyed it, Zach.